Controlling guns. The president takes executive action trying to restrict gun ownership. Underwater. Rare January flooding in the Mississippi Valley leaves dozens dead and a swath of damage. Money talks. American deaf entrepreneurs make their voices heard in the economy. And patron of many. Wife, mother, convert, woman religious, we celebrate American Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, January 4th, 2016. Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Brian Patrick, and President Obama announces plans to close legal loopholes for gun buyers. Defenders of the Second Amendment are outraged. Chief White House correspondent and political director Lauren Ashburn reports.
President Obama met with top officials today, including Attorney General Loretta Lynch, FBI Director James Comey, and members of the House Democratic Gun Violence Task Force. It's all to talk about options for tougher gun laws.
I'm also confident that the recommendations that are being made by my team here are ones that are entirely consistent with the Second Amendment and people's lawful right to bear arms.
He's expected to take executive action soon to expand background checks on gun sales, among other things. In the wake of mass shootings in San Bernardino, California, and at a church in Charleston, South Carolina, earlier this year, the president has frequently expressed his frustration with Congress's inability to pass what he calls common sense gun laws. That includes expanding background checks on gun sales. At the White House today, Press Secretary Josh Earnest reiterated the administration's concerns ahead of the announcement.
We have to do something in this country to address the consequences of Congress's failure to act.
Predictably, Republican presidential contenders are threatening to wipe out those measures once they are at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
If they violate the Second Amendment and undermine our constitutional right to defend ourselves and our families, we will do everything possible over the next year and a half to reverse them.
The White House is confident these recommendations will hold up in a court of law.
Lauren Ashburn at the White House. Thank you. The site of the San Bernardino terror attack reopens for the first time today. Workers return to the social service center where 14 people died last month.
Most of us are relieved to be back at work. We want to continue with the normalcy, and we miss each other very much.
Investigators blame the mass shooting on a husband and wife terror team. The social service center is now surrounded by fence and security guards. Well, it's now just a matter of weeks before the people speak. Real results from presidential primaries and caucuses will soon replace national public opinion polls. Just 4 weeks to go to the first contests in the 2016 presidential election.
If we win Iowa, I think we're going to win everything after that.
GOP candidates scramble to build momentum ahead of the high-stakes Iowa caucuses. This morning, the launch of Donald Trump's first campaign ad touts his controversial platform.
That's why he's calling for a temporary shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until we can figure out what's going on. He'll quickly cut the head off ISIS and take their oil.
Donald Trump, I don't believe, is going to be the party's nominee. And if he is, he's going to get crushed by Hillary Clinton.
Jeb Bush continues to grapple with dwindling poll numbers. Trump still leads the pack, accusing rival Ted Cruz of copying his immigration plan.
He said, "We will build a wall." The first time I've ever heard him say it. And I'm the one that came up with it.
In the battle for evangelical voters, Trump slams Cruz on religion.
Cuba, generally speaking, is a Catholic country, and you don't equate evangelicals with Cuba.
Meanwhile, former President Bill Clinton counters Republican candidate Donald Trump's stand against Muslims. Clinton is on the campaign trail in New Hampshire, stumping for his wife Hillary, who leads the Democratic pack. The former president believes Americans need to be more open to Muslims.
America is a place that welcomes all people who are willing to treat other people the way they'd like to be treated, willing to follow the law, willing to create a common community.
Clinton says it's important that we stand against terrorists who try to abuse religion for any purpose. Gabby Morangiello is political reporter for the Washington Examiner, so a month out from the caucuses in Iowa. What are you watching most closely in this late term of the race?
Well, there's really three things that I'm keeping an eye on right now and that I think most Americans should be keeping an eye on. And that is, number one, how Donald Trump continues to behave towards Ted Cruz. Cruz is rising in the state level polls in Iowa, and he really poses the most significant threat to Donald Trump.
They've been pretty civil so far.
They have. They've exchanged friendly fire here or there, but I mean, as this heats up, as Cruz continues to rise, it's going to be interesting to see how Donald Trump reacts to that. Number two, I think it's really interesting to see this emerging movement to push a number of Ted Cruz's supporters to backing Marco Rubio. Many strategists think that Marco Rubio is the most electable in a general election matchup with Hillary Clinton, and they're trying to encourage backers of Ted Cruz to instead shift their support to Rubio. And number three, I think it's going to be really interesting to see after the caucuses who drops out and how their exit affects a number of the top-tier candidates going into New Hampshire and to other early voting contests.
Up until now, Gabby, Donald Trump has relied on his bombastic statements to get a lot of attention on himself. Now he's paying, probably out of his own money, for ads. What did you think of that new ad from him?
Well, his latest campaign ad is probably as unorthodox and unconventional as Donald Trump himself. I mean, typically when you see a candidate release a new ad, it demonstrates, what their message is. It's of them speaking to a screen. And when you see Donald Trump's new ad, it's of pictures of Hillary Clinton, of Donald Trump, of footage of his massive campaign rallies, and it's of him touting these policies that have stirred such controversy so far in the campaign race. It really demonstrates a significant shift in his campaign as well. He has routinely touted the fact that he hasn't had to pay for advertising and that his low-budget campaign just demonstrates how he could turn the economy around. And so to see him shift to engaging in paid advertising and to be spending nearly $2 million a week on these television ads demonstrates or suggests how nervous he is going into some of these early voting contests.
Well, he's got deep pockets, so he can take the campaign pretty deep. So the president's idea of unilateral action on gun control, how do you see that playing into the campaign?
Well, I'd say this is a blessing for Republican candidates because this gives them an opportunity to side with the American people. A number of public opinion polls following the Paris attacks and the terrorist attacks in San Bernardino suggests that Americans think the best way of defeating and defending America against domestic terrorism is to arm more individuals, as opposed to enhancing gun control and making it more difficult for Americans to legally carry a firearm. So really, this is an opportunity for Republican candidates to go out there to criticize President Obama's executive action and say that this is another demonstration of his overreach and of him sidestepping the democratic process. And I think that's what we've already seen. Donald Trump and Ted Cruz today criticized this impending unilateral action on gun control, and I'm sure many more candidates will follow in the weeks to come.
They jumped right on it. Gabby Morangiello with the Washington Examiner. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
U.S. stocks begin the new year sharply lower after a big sell-off in China. The Dow Jones Industrial Average closed down 276 points, or more than 1.5% today. The Dow had been down more than 460 points at mid-afternoon, but later rebounded somewhat. The Nasdaq was off more than 100 points on this first day of trading of 2016. We are continuing to witness more historic flooding in America's Midwest. A long stretch of the Illinois River remains closed as the river rises to near record levels. The Mississippi River also rose quickly after more than 10 inches of rain fell in Missouri and Illinois last week, creating major flooding.
It's rising all day long. When we get up in the morning, it's like 6 more inches.
The U.S. Coast Guard is starting to allow barge traffic to resume on the Mississippi. A 5-mile stretch had been closed near St. Louis due to swift currents on the river. The FBI says it's trying to peacefully resolve a standoff at a national wildlife refuge in Oregon. That refuge is in the hands of armed protesters upset with prison sentences of 2 ranchers. A group of militia members stand their ground after seizing control of a federal facility in a remote area of eastern Oregon. The armed protesters took over the headquarters of a national wildlife refuge on Saturday.
These people are wearing fatigues and openly carrying rifles and stuff like that.
The protesters admit they're ready for a fight.
If the federal government decides to use force, will you respond with force as well? That would have to be determined at that time. I would not be able to report on that.
Are you prepared to?
Absolutely.
The protest is in support of two local ranchers, Dwight and Stephen Hammond, who recently served prison sentences for arson. They claim they set fires that burned on federal land to protect their own land from wildfires. A judge has ordered them back to prison, saying federal guidelines mandate longer sentences. The protesters claim it's a long-running land dispute between the Hammonds and the government.
The ranch is adjacent to the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge and to have private property up on the Steen Mountains. They have refused for nearly 40 years to sell their ranch. And there have been very vindictive behaviors because they refuse. There have been intimidations, and the list goes on.
Among those occupying the refuge are two sons of Cliven Bundy. He led a standoff with the government last year over grazing rights in Nevada. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. A growing rift between Iran and Saudi Arabia spreads throughout the Arab world. Several nations follow Saudi Arabia's lead, cutting off diplomatic ties with Iran. Wyatt Goolsbee has the latest from the Saudi embassy in Washington.
Brian, the Obama administration is treading carefully tonight, not wanting to raise any more tension between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Today, Secretary of State John Kerry made several private calls to Arab nations, warning against overreaction. Hundreds of people poured onto the streets of the Iranian capital Monday, voicing their outrage at Saudi Arabia for the execution of a prominent Shiite cleric. The fallout is spreading. Saudi Arabia says all flights to and from Iran have been canceled and all diplomatic ties have been cut. Traditional Saudi allies have lined up in support, with Sudan and Bahrain cutting ties with Iran and the UAE downgrading their diplomatic ties. Now Russia says it will help in bringing those countries back to the table. The backlash and protests started after Saudi Arabia executed 47 people accused of terror acts. Among those killed, Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr, a Shiite cleric critical of the Saudi monarchy. On Saturday, crowds in Tehran ransacked the Saudi embassy, prompting condemnation of the attacks around the world. Western countries like Germany and the UK have tried to stay neutral, urging both sides to open up dialogue.
We want to see good relations between the different countries in the Middle East, not least because that will be absolutely essential for solving the crisis that we have in Syria, which is the source of so many of these problems.
Perry Kemek, who has worked on Middle East issues for years, says if tensions are not resolved, it could have long-term implications.
We've got these civil wars burning through the region, that these conflicts, whether in Yemen, in Syria, in Iraq, that they begin to regionalize, which really could make the situation much more volatile than it already is.
A United Nations envoy will be going to Saudi Arabia and Iran to discuss an end to the Syrian conflict. The two countries were supposed to help facilitate peace talks at the end of this month, but right now that doesn't seem likely. Brian?
Wyatt Goolsbee at the Saudi Embassy here in Washington. Thank you, Wyatt. We saw British Prime Minister David Cameron in that story, and a new ISIS video threatens the Prime Minister. That video features a man speaking with an English accent. This is a picture taken from the graphic video. The video actually shows 5 men being killed. The terrorists claim the men were British spies. That video has not been independently verified. The Holy See announces that a comprehensive agreement between the Holy See and the state of Palestine has come into full force. It was signed by both parties in June. That agreement outlines the life and activity of the church in Palestinian territories. It also reaffirms support for a negotiated and peaceful solution to the conflict in that region. Coming up, a New Jersey family presents the gifts to Pope Francis at Mass on the Solemnity of Mary, Mother of God. And with the help of new technology, deaf entrepreneurs build strong businesses.
Vinci l'indifferenza e conquista la pace.
Pope Francis saying defeat indifference and conquer peace. His Angelus address includes a reflection on World Peace Day, saying we should entrust sad and happy moments to God, our mercy, and our hope. Thanks for joining us this Monday evening, the first Monday of the new year. I'm Brian Patrick. An American family visiting the Vatican gets a pleasant surprise. Members of the family were invited to begin the new year presenting the gifts at the Papal Mass in St. Peter's Basilica. Of course, that Mass celebrating the Solemnity of Mary, Mother of God, and World Peace Day. Monsignor James Cecchio, outgoing rector of the Pontifical North American College, helped arrange it as a Christmas gift to his family. 8 of his family members were in Rome for a week-long visit.
It was just a wonderful way to start the new year, and it made me look forward to the new year and all the wonderful things that could come in 2016.
It was the family's first opportunity to see and then eventually greet Pope Francis. The deaf and hearing impaired are often marginalized. Now a handful of determined American deaf entrepreneurs make themselves heard in the economy. Catherine Zeltner shares their story.
When you visit San Francisco's Moltzeria restaurant, everything looks as you'd expect. It's what you hear that may surprise you. Virtually every staff member is deaf. The business is thriving, but the pizzeria owners say they face lingering stereotypes.
Some people think that it's going to be really complicated to have a conversation with our servers, but really it's not. Just imagine yourself in another country, for example. How do you communicate? You know, you use gestures, you point. It's just the same here. It works the same.
The Steins aren't the only deaf business owners creative with their skills. Mara Ledeen's planned to be a graphic designer because it requires little communication with others. But the Brooklyn-based designer ultimately wanted a career in fashion.
Many of my friends love my clothes, they love my shoes, and it really hit me that maybe I should become a fashion designer instead. So that's when I decided.
Ledeen's launched By Mara, a clothing store embracing the deaf culture. Dr. Tom Baldridge directs business administration at Gallaudet University, a school for the deaf and hard of hearing. He credits technology for the great strides in deaf entrepreneurship, but knows there are still hurdles to overcome.
Face-to-face interactions are still a big challenge, and there's a lot of naivete still among hearing people about deaf people and how to correspond with them.
Businesses like Moltzeria and By Mara, Baldridge says, are good role models for young deaf people today.
Dr. Baldridge says there's growing interest in entrepreneurship at Gallaudet University. The school is offering students experience in running businesses like the campus coffee shops. Brian.
It's a beautiful language, sign language, and a great story. Thank you, Catherine. Up next, on this feast of Elizabeth Ann Seton, we get to know the first American-born saint. And setting the stage for the 2016 March for Life in Washington, now less than 3 weeks away. On Monday, the 4th of January, we're celebrating the first American-born saint, Elizabeth Ann Seton. Wife, mother, widow, convert, and eventually religious sister. She was a pioneer of Catholic education in the U.S. Thanks for joining us this Monday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. St. Elizabeth Ann Seton leaves a lasting legacy. She's remembered across America, but especially in one place designed in her honor. Jason Calvi takes us to the National Shrine of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton in Emmitsburg, Maryland.
Here walked the first U.S.-born saint. People flocked to the National Shrine of Elizabeth Ann Seton.
She had struggles with her children, and I thought as a saint, you would never experience struggles. Your children would be little saints.
Orchard Bianchi came all the way from Connecticut to visit the final resting place of the mother and saint.
I said, wow, she experienced troubles and difficulties, and I immediately bonded with her.
Seton was born into a wealthy Episcopalian family in 1774.
Elizabeth Ann Seton became a widow at the young age of 29. She ended up converting to Catholicism, founding a religious order around 1809. But the death of her husband wasn't the end of her suffering. She even buried 2 of her children right here in Emmitsburg, Maryland,
where the saint opened a free Catholic girls' school. After she died on this date in 1821, her sisters carried on her legacy, caring for the soldiers at the nearby Battle of Gettysburg and teaching.
I arrived here, and then I was diagnosed with cancer, and it was reading Mother Seton's writings, especially Friendships of My Soul, that gave me a lot of peace.
40 years ago, Seton was named a saint. This image of her showcased on St. Peter's Basilica that day. It's now out of the archives and on display here.
And the strength she had facing all the challenges that she suffered through, but still went on to do some amazing things like founding the Free Catholic School and also the Community of Sisters.
a suffering mother celebrated today. Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Jason. And preparations are in full swing here in Washington for the 2016 March for Life on Friday, January 22nd. Now less than 3 weeks away. Jeannie Mancini is busy because she's president of March for Life. Jeannie, let's explore this year's motto of March for Life. Pro-life and pro-woman go hand in hand.
Right. Right. So the March for Life is this wonderful educational opportunity, kind of a platform to teach about the most cutting edge issues that we need to hear about the most. And there are so many conflicted and confusing messages out there about women that we thought that this was really the providential and opportune time to talk about this. Life empowers women. Life is good for women, and being pro-life is truly being pro-woman. So the theme is pro-life and pro-women go hand in hand.
So with all this talk of the war on women,
right,
do you think the American public gets this, especially women, that being for life is pro-women?
Well, I think that we are bombarded with false messages about what it means to be a woman, and many women are falsely told and start to believe these ideas that they have to control their fertility, and they have to have a lot of control over, the possibility of being a mother, instead of understanding that a woman's capacity to be a mother, whether she ever is biologically or not, very much informs who she is as a person. It's very intricate to her inherent dignity and vocation as a woman. And so that's very much tied into this theme for this March for Life. So this false idea that to be pro-woman you have to be pro-choice is something we just want to squash, because it's manipulative and it's not true.
Well, we are 4 days into 2016, a presidential election year. How do you see this March for Life playing into that election?
I think particularly in the messaging, I think the March for Life will continue with our theme this entire year, and we mentioned the false war on women that will be prevalent, with some of the messaging for this election. And so we want to get the truth out there. Again, that being pro-life is being pro-woman, and that this capacity for motherhood is empowering to women. So we will be beating the drum with it.
Are you expecting any of the presidential candidates to participate?
We're not a political organization per se, so that's not something that we would particularly invite. But at the same time, we'd love it if any of the candidates came and marched, and many of them have in the past. And we'd also really like our candidates to make a stance that if and when they win, that they will come to the March for Life and speak that following year after they're inaugurated.
That would be awesome. A lot of young people are really deeply involved in this now. How do you see this shaping the future of the march and the pro-life movement?
Yeah. NARAL Pro-Choice America a few years ago talked publicly, and I think they were probably humiliated after they did this, about the March for Life and how there are just hordes and hordes of young people. And they decided that they needed a change in marketing after that, and they changed their president, and they basically thought, what are we doing wrong? Why aren't we appealing to young people? The truth is that it wasn't a marketing issue, it was a product issue. Young people can see through falsehoods, and they know the truth, and they know that the truth sets you free. St. John Paul II talked about young people as being the best ambassadors for life because they're so enthusiastic and they see abortion as the human rights issue of today. They know that they will do away with this human rights issue. So, for example, Students for Life is just one of my favorite groups because of their enthusiasm and vigor.
They are full of life, and that really shows. Jeannie Mancini with March for Life. Thank you. We'll see you on the 22nd.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Thank you.
Until tomorrow, for the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Tonight, we leave you with some very special moments from Friday's Solemnity of Mary, Mother of God Mass and the Angelus for World Peace Day. Good night. God bless you.